All right, Martin. I don't know about you, but I can barely remember what I had for dinner last night or the night before. But this is September, and every September we think about events on 9/11/01, and I bet you can remember that day, can't you?
Yeah, I sure can. Like yesterday for sure. It's
Yeah.
something, every year when it rolls around, it kind of catches me off guard. But then definitely, feel back to that time and what was going on that day.
Yeah. All right. So let's see. You were an F-16 pilot on that day, and where were you operational?
What was F-15s?
15. Excuse me.
Yeah, and yeah, I was flying the Eagle out of Otis Air National Guard Base in Massachusetts,
All right.
Cape Cod.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah,
How long had you been doing that by that time?
let's see. I got there in mid '99 after doing some active duty time, and yeah, so a couple of years there, and we had we always have a um, alert commitment there at Otis where we had two jets on alert 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. So
Was that
that
called
and
Noble Eagle back then, or was it called something else?
yeah, that was just after 9/11. And Noble Eagle was basically the CAP missions, combat air patrol missions
Right.
over.
But you guys were
Yeah,
standing alerts on September 10th, 2001?
yeah, for years and years, 30
Huh.
years, believe it or not.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Just like NORAD stuff or
NORAD,
okay.
exactly.
All right.
Some drug interdiction stuff too, but mostly NORAD.
Okay. All right. So when you were standing those alerts, were you how far away were you, if you will? Like the alerts I'm used to on a carrier are alert 7, you're sitting in the airplane, 15, you're in the ready room in your flight gear, 30 is you're in a flight suit, and then 60 and 120. Of course, you can't go farther than wherever you can go on the ship. But
Right.
what 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 posture would you guys stand prior to that day?
So we were what's called immediate, which would be, not in the jet, but you had to be, airborne immediately,
Wow.
basically. And
Okay.
typically our jets were parked across the ramp. So it was a, 2 minute car ride across the ramp to jump in the jets. And then at night, after hours, we had a living facility right there attached to them. So,
Hmm. All right. So you had to be relatively close. All
right.
right. So tell us about on the morning. I mean, morning on the East Coast
Yeah.
of 9/11. You guys, did you say earlier you had already been flying that day?
So I was going in for a just a regular training mission. We were doing a 4v4 similar, uh, you know, combat, training mission. We had two guys on alert, obviously, and I remember it was a beautiful day up in Cape Cod. I mean, it was the perfect day to go flying. And I was also a pilot with United Airlines, so I was getting ready to leave for a trip the next morning. But I remember sitting at Dunkin' Donuts getting a coffee on the way to work and hearing that it was the UN like National Day of Peace or
Oh,
something to that effect, and just kind of driving into work thinking that this is like the perfect day to fly.
mhm.
So that's what we were going into train and showed up a couple hours early to get the briefing boards ready and everything, and our director of operations was actually on alert that day and saw him at the desk. We typically wore some of our gear just to expedite if you were on alert. We'd have our G suits on in case the horn went off. But yeah, I mean, totally typical normal day flying ahead of us is what we thought.
Yeah. Just to draw a parallel, I was in Fallon, Nevada at the time, and I
Mm-hmm.
woke up. I think I was in the car at 6 something, so that would have been 9 something your time. And I remember hearing on the radio that an airplane had crashed into the World Trade Center. And my first impression was, what an idiot. How can you not
Yeah,
see this thing and avoid it?
right.
So at any rate, so you're probably up early. And so you go out on this flight, and I assume it's uneventful. So tell us about it.
Yeah, so and it's funny you say that because kind of behind the scenes, we didn't know what was going on because we were pre-flighting our jets. We briefed normally and went out to our jets, but we had a command post right in there that controlled all the alert assets, and right in our squadron building, and then an operations desk that kind of did the training day-to-day stuff. And one of our enlisted guys at the operation desk got a call from the tower at Otis saying, "Hey, we've got Boston Center on the line. There's something about a hijacking," and that was completely out of the chain that it should have fallen through, to get through NORAD into the command post. And so our squadron commander, who was kind of supervising that day, the flying operation, ran into the command post, and he literally had Boston Center on one phone and NORAD on another phone, and he was kind of the go-between trying to figure out what was going on. So he called the alert guys into the command post, and same kind of thing. He said, "Hey, we've got a confirmed hijacking. Get out to the jets and just await words." And and talking to them after the fact, they just like you said, they thought, this was like a hijack jet that was going to land. They were going to escort it and land it somewhere. There'd be
Demand a
demands,
bunch of money or something. So,
exactly,
yeah.
and then that'd be that. And so while we were doing our pre-flight on our jets, there were 8 of us. We saw the security forces come out onto the flight line with their lights flashing, and just because we had seen it so many times, oh, they're getting scrambled, but not really thinking a whole lot about it because it wasn't uncommon that would happen on a day-to-day basis. And so we saw them blast off, and then it was kind of out of sight, out of mind until we took off about 10 minutes later. Our training area kind of runs along Long Island, south over the ocean there, and they just leave us alone out there. But we were in the training area getting ready to fight, and they said, "Hey, it's Boston Center. You guys need to get back home," which was really, really, I've never heard that call before. That was unusual.
Yeah.
So we called our squadron ops, and they said, "Yeah, let's get back as soon as you can." And meanwhile, those guys were pretty much almost to New York City, the 2 alert jets, when they heard the second jet just crashed in the World Trade Center. And that's the first they knew that anything was going wrong that day, other than that they were getting scrambled to intercept the hijacked airliner.
Yeah. So let's back up a little bit, Opus.
Yeah.
What would be an alert loadout back then for the F-15?
Yeah, so it changed. I think that day we had 2 external tanks and probably 2 heat-seeking missiles and 4 radar missiles, but I'm not exactly sure about that. It was kind of a standard load for that
Sure.
kind of a mission.
And gun, I'm sure.
And guns, yeah.
And was the idea with the NORAD frame of mind back then that it might be, I mean, what was the threat, quote unquote, prior to that day?
Yeah, so interesting. There was always and there had been history at Otis of, the Russian bombers kind of a thing, but that hadn't been for years. Mostly it was, unidentified aircraft that were coming into the ADIS that needed to be identified. So,
which is usually just private pilots who screwed up their
especially in the
transponders.
summertime, fish spotters and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Well, excuse to go flying maybe, but
exactly.
All right. Okay. So the idea of airliners as a weapon probably hadn't kind of occurred to you guys, maybe? Yeah,
No.
it certainly hadn't to me at that point.
Yeah.
But, all right. So, yeah, sorry to interrupt the story, but all right. So they have you guys come home, and then what?
Yeah. So, just like, I'm sure any fighter pilot would do, they said, stay out by your jets. We're going to, get you what you need, and then we're going to launch you again. And of course, you don't turn an F-15 in minutes. So we all ran inside the squadron to see what was going on. But when I was getting into the building, we were watching that just after that second plane had hit World Trade Center. They typically, it would take us 2 hours to turn a jet, get it back airborne, refueled and serviced and everything. And that's without adding live weapons on there. And they had us turned within a half an hour at most. So it was an amazing feat that they achieved to get us back in the air. And so initially it was we out of the 8 that we had been on the training mission with, they had 4 ready, and we blasted off. They cleared 2 up to Boston, and then just to cap, and we were headed up towards Boston. Got an intercept out over the just off the coast, which turned out to be a C-130. Believe it or not, that's how chaotic it was that at that point. Um, and just I'll just back up for a second. When I ran out to my jet, I had 2 heat-seeking missiles and a gun loaded up, and the one of our intel officers met us at the jet, and he said there's 8 jets airborne with bombs on board, and we've had 2 jets ran out of fuel and crash into the Atlantic. Of course, none of that was true, but that just goes to show you what kind of information we had when we took off. It was just crazy.
Yeah.
So we knew that one of the jets airborne was United 93. And we originally were scrambled out to see what was going on with that jet, but it had crashed just minutes after we took off, so we never got near it. And yeah, so then after we went up over Boston, we got vectored down over Long Island, and then there was nothing there. And then they said, we'll head down over New York City, where the original 2 guys who had been scrambled were capping at that point.
Yeah. I remember that morning I drove through the gate, and it was one of those just wavy on kind of thing. And I rolled down my window and said, "Hey, aren't you guys elevated alert yet?" Because I think at that point they'd started to hint at the idea of terrorism. And they said, "No." So then I ran into my squadron, which was Top Gun at the time, and said, "Hey, turn on the TV." And at that point, it was such a helpless feeling. All you can do is sit and watch. And of all things, I couldn't just sit there. So I actually went into the gym and changed and got a workout. We have a little gym there, used to, and there was a TV in there, and I turned it on, and I remember watching live the second one too. And it was just this disgusting feeling, but also this helplessness, but also, as you intimated, Opus, just this uncertainty, like, what the heck is going on? Like,
right.
I mean, we all know now from the benefit of history and all the intel that we've gathered to know where it started and how they got into the country in the first place and the lessons and everything else. But at the time, boy, we didn't know what was what. And I'll tell you, I mean, you talked about your experiences. For us, we were pure training. I mean, I didn't even know there was live weapons in Fallon other than the ones we would drop on for air to surface. And by the end of the day, we, no kidding, had old F-18s loaded up with Sparrow and Sidewinder and guys sitting in their flight gear just because we just didn't know.
Right.
And so I have to think that was happening all over the country. But how long did you end up flying on that second flight? Did you refuel, or did you just hang out for?
Yeah, so we actually commandeered a tanker that was leading over a flight of A-10s that were redeploying back to the States. And so the other 2 guys who took off with us went out and intercepted that tanker and camped that thing over Boston. Now, it just so happened that the day we were doing our training mission, we had a tanker scheduled. So we just moved him from our training area down to New York City, and we refueled probably 7 or 8 times that day. I flew for about 6 or 7 hours, and of course, obviously, most of the work was done in the first hour because everything had been ordered to land, as you know. But I think it's like you said, we didn't know what was going on, and when the first 2 guys were after the impact, they said, basically, say mission, meaning what do you want us to do? And NORAD was completely silent. So they didn't know what to do either.
Yeah.
And finally, the flight lead said, well, listen, we're going to set up a cap over New York City. We'll ring around it 25 miles. And nothing will get inside that ring. They didn't want to get drawn off of the cap and then have somebody come from the north or something and execute another attack. So,
any idea how many fighter elements were airborne that day on the East Coast?
I know that we had 2. we had 4 airborne over New York City, 2 over Boston. We had, eventually there were a couple over Washington, D.C., obviously, for the Pentagon, slightly after us. And then, and as far as the rest of the country goes, I'm not exactly sure.
Okay.
So, um, and back to that mission, when we took off, obviously things had developed a little bit, but they told us, hey, your mission is to intercept and identify, and if an airliner doesn't comply, then stand by for more words. And I just remember thinking to myself, man, I know what's coming next, and I do not want to have to, shoot down an airliner. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And the other thing you got to remember is we were all, Air National Guards. So out of the 6 of us airborne that day, 4 were airline pilots, 2 United, 2 American. So, I tell you, one of the bright spots of the day came when our squadron operations came on and said, hey, everybody in the squadron's accounted for, just because we didn't know
Uh,
if anybody was involved with,
yeah.
the hijacking or
Yeah. Because
whatnot.
at least what 93 was out of Boston, or was there more? I don't know that part of
Yeah,
it.
yeah, there were 2. So an
Okay.
American and a yeah,
Yeah.
93. So
I
um,
I assume, were you close enough to see the smoke from New York City? I have to think you were. I heard the astronauts could see it from outer space.
yeah, so when we finally got down to New York City, the second building had just fallen, and basically the entire lower part of Manhattan was just covered in smoke. And we kind of thought the buildings went over, not they didn't
Right.
just go straight down. So we didn't know. That was another scary scene because we thought 50,000 people had died. We had no idea, and that's kind of when it clicked and went, look, you're here to do a mission, and you're not making the decision, you're executing the decision that the people on the ground, hopefully with a big picture, are making. And so it's kind of the country's counting on you to get it done and make this stop.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it was just incredible.
Yeah.
We worked really closely, believe it or not, with New York Approach that day because NORAD and Giant Killer up there in the Northeast, it was hard for them to keep track of, you know, threats and non-threats. I think it was really interesting, looking back on it, working with New York Approach, who never worked with military before. And they were just calling targets out all over, New York City, New Jersey, and everything. And we basically said, listen, you guys are giving us good information, but we need to know where the target is, maybe an altitude if you have it, and then we just need you guys to be quiet once we
Right.
say, we're radar contact. So they caught on really quickly, and it was actually really effective for having never worked with them before and them never working with us before
Yeah.
to chase down aircraft.
Yeah. Did you end up intercepting any civilian guys that were just out, had no clue what was going on? And
Yeah, and so and also, believe it or not, lots of helicopters, military even, that were coming to sort of lend aid and possibly help evac out.
yeah.
And I don't know how effective that was, but I do remember, you know, intercepting a 3 ship of Chinook helicopters and then coming up on guard and saying, hey, don't shoot us down. It's like, we're here to help too, and it was just
Right.
like, it was just crazy because there
Yeah.
was there was no real operational control of what was going on right then. So
When you think of the expression "fog of war," is that
yeah,
kind of, you think about that day?
definitely. I
Yeah.
mean, and we're air to air, we're good. Navy, Air Force, we're good at what we do. I think it helped stabilize the situation, that we kind of took control of it from the air
Mm.
and that we could see what was going on. Shortly after we got on cap, we heard, hey, we're having the same issues in Washington, D.C. And it was really one of those things that, your heart started racing again. But, it was like, look, here's our responsibility. This is our AOR. It's
Right.
over the World Trade Center, and they're going to have to get someone else to deal with that, and kind of compartmentalize that and
Yeah.
just concentrate on what we were doing.
Yeah.
Um,
You know, I don't know about you, Opus, but you join the military, you expect that you're going to sacrifice where you want to go, where you want to live, even maybe what airplane you fly. And I talk to young people on this show about that all the time because you may not get the airplane you want, but you try to make the most of it. And I think I was personally ready for most things, but the thought of shooting down an airliner full of people, just that was out of left field. That when I started contemplating that, and I was never, of course, in a position where I was flying like you were, but you were, that just, I guess my point is, that much closer. What, I mean, you're in the airplane. Hey, you're all business, but you kind of alluded to it before. What was that
yeah.
like for you? Did you allow that to creep in a little bit?
I mean, it did. I'll be completely honest with you. And I had flown combat missions before, and it sounded like combat. So to juxtapose that over your city, you're in the United States, it was that was hard to deal with. But like I said, once we got down to ground zero, it had to stop, and that was part of the oath you took.
Yeah,
It's people ask me all the time, well, looking back, what do you think about that day? Well, it was probably the worst flying day I had, but also, in a way, I was pretty lucky because I didn't have to, because
yeah,
that would have obviously been a life changing event. Um, the truth is that those terrorists, they knew what they were doing. You weren't going to save the people on those airliners, unfortunately,
that's right.
no matter what. So it became about regaining air superiority over our country and protecting the people on the ground.
Yeah. And I have to
So
think, as I got to be delicate here. I mean,
yeah,
if you assume the airplane is going to crash, right? The people on board are almost a sunk cost, and I would
yeah,
never consider someone's life a sunk cost. But I think if you think of the analysis, you could say, okay, that's a foregone conclusion. What can I save if I keep them from striking the White House or
right,
the Capitol or whatever the other targets were for? And of course, I don't want to go into any of the, we're such a divided country right now. Some people might cheer for certain
right,
parts of that, but I don't. That's not the point I want to make, of course. But if you did have to do it, I think, at least for me, that's what I would have to do. Is, hey,
yeah,
look, kind of like the Flight 93 guys. Okay, they went down in out, what is that, Pennsylvania,
yeah.
and so nobody on the ground died. But of course, everybody on the airplane did. But nobody else died at the Pentagon or the Capitol or whatever.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
that's
mean,
just
they're
crazy.
just, unfortunately, they were, on the front lines of the battle that day, and certainly not by choice. And
Yeah,
they're all heroes. I mean, I got to meet, many of the families just, in the time after 9/11. It is tragic. It's
yeah,
just absolutely tragic. But for us, we didn't have a chance to let that emotion come into it at that time. It was something we all dealt with in varying degrees, certainly years after 9/11, and even today. Um, and so, I mean, I guess that's how you process it.
yeah. Did you?
We're trained to do a mission, and it's just, even though we weren't planning on that specific mission, we just had to kind of box it off.
Yeah.
Um,
When you finally landed that afternoon, how long had you been airborne?
think about 7 hours, 6 hours. Yeah, and
No, no peanut butter and jelly, right? Nothing, but
nothing.
whatever you
I
keep in
mean,
your helmet bag.
honestly, it seemed like an hour. Just
Okay,
because it was
so much
just,
happening.
exactly.
Yeah,
And I mean, I just we're going back to the base. Requesting an altitude like you normally would do to fly back. An
right.
IFR clearance, and they're like, "You guys are the only ones flying
Yeah,
this. Whatever
do
you
what you
want." It
want.
just was
Wow.
like, wow. I
Yeah.
mean, crazy.
Did you guys man alerts through the night or the next day or anything, or a fly, I should say, alerts?
Yeah, so that changed a lot after 9/11, and then
Yeah.
we kind of had that tiered system that you talked about. I'm sure there was some coordination, Army, Navy, or sorry, Air Force, Navy, and um, sort of, what do we have that we've done that would work in this situation? So yeah, we definitely upped our alert commitment. We did not train for the next year. We didn't do one training mission for the next year. Our whole
Wow.
being was all flying combat air patrols over American cities. So, and then
Crazy.
having that immediate response, which, after 9/11, it was anything, obviously, these temporary flight restrictions were causing issues for
Hmm.
private pilots. You'd have people pop up with similar names that, on a terrorist watch list, we'd go intercept. So then it was really busy for sure.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
like, like you said, on September 10th, they talked about alert being, a mission that was going away.
Hmm.
And obviously after September 11th, that all changed
Yeah.
in that day.
Well, the world changed too. And
Right.
I look back and I remember thinking at the time, and I don't pretend to be particularly smart. Everybody knew that the world was going to change, but just our way of life, air travel, certainly. And of course, COVID, I think, is also having a similar effect now on this generation. But uh, I, yeah, I just knew that nothing would ever be the same. And you know, uh, it was definitely one of those days that people who were alive when Kennedy was shot, they say they remember. People who were alive when Pearl Harbor was attacked, same thing. And for those of us who experience this, it's one of those days you just never forget. Certainly for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, looking back on it, and I've spoken to all kinds of different groups around the country about it, and honestly, it's that whole the thing that resonates with me is that never forget. I think it's important that we remember, even if it's just once a year, that this is a turning point in our country's history for many reasons, um, and that. We owe it to those people who found themselves on the front lines that day, whether they were in the World Trade Center or on one of the airliners, to just pause
Yeah.
and remember them and,
Yeah.
give thanks for the lives that they had. The people in the World Trade Center, they just went to work that day. You know
That's
what I
right.
mean? And they, they just they didn't get home that day, and it's just something that I try to really reflect on every day and
Yeah.
feel blessed that I'm here and have this time that they don't. So
Well, there are victims of hate when it comes right down to it. I
right,
mean, there are parts of the world that, for whatever reason, have this detestation and hate for others, and that's yeah, I still can't get my head around that. And of course, we
yeah,
all know the next 10, 12, I guess 20 years of battles that have happened in the various countries overseas where this was allowed to take place to scheme these awful actions. But on a lighter note, do you recall? I want to say it was like a year after, or maybe two, that some military 747, I think it might be one of those like airborne command posts or something, wanted to do an aerial photo X next to the Statue of Liberty. And so they flew super low around New York with an F-16 with a camera guy in the back, and everybody freaked out. Do
yeah.
you remember that? I
I
mean,
do remember.
not to make fun of any of this, because it's all, of
Yeah,
course, very serious, but I just remember reading that thinking, oh, for heaven's sakes, who
yeah.
dropped the ball on this?
Not good idea.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, too soon is always that little
Right.
meme, right? And yes, it was
Exactly.
definitely too soon because not only do you have a low flying giant airplane, they can't tell if it's civilian or not, but then you have
Right.
this military airplane right next to it. So, yeah, I just
Yeah.
remember thinking, oh gosh, that's a head slapper.
Yeah, and Jello, I mean, so those things looking back, one of the things I think about, and I get a lot of questions about, are well, what's changed? Has anything
Mm,
changed? And I think there have been a lot of positive changes with this. Of course, security, the TSA was born out of this, and so I think that's been a positive thing. Uh, I think procedures in the cockpit at the airlines are, obviously a lot different from before September 11th, and I think a lot more appropriate. I'd like to see the double barrier get mandated through Congress, and it's kind of stalled out. But I think that's another positive thing that could happen
Hmm.
um, to sort of mitigate the threat, from the back. So other than that, I think it's just people. Just like you said, it's a different world now, and
Yeah,
it's something we shouldn't fear because that's not that's a tool of the bad side.
that's right.
We got to live our lives, but
Yeah,
at the same time, it's good to debrief and look at how we can improve, and
yeah.
always, as the threat evolves.
And I would say, as you spoke earlier about remembering, and I totally agree, certainly the people, but I think we could also look at, not to say the failures, but look how much better I think we are now at taking seriously certain intel indications, because it sounds like, and I didn't read the whole report and I don't really know that much, but I feel like, because I remember I was in the Navy, of course, but I remember like when the USS Cole was struck in Yemen,
Sure.
and there were some bombings in, I think, I'm just looking on
Sudan,
the
was it?
country right now. What's that?
Yeah, I
Kenya?
think it was, yeah, Sudan or Kenya or maybe both.
Embassy
Yeah.
bombings, but there was a
Mhm.
lot going on. And I remember, because like I said, I was at Top Gun, so I'd left my first squadron. And when those events happened in that first squadron, I remember our intel officer briefing us on the uptick of events,
Right.
terrorist attacks, and various things. And so I hope that the, maybe not the intel community, because you shouldn't necessarily blame them, but the people who at least take the information have learned. And certainly, again, I think that clearly we're a different military than we
Right.
were then, because we've been very focused on terrorist indications and all that since then. So, yeah, I'd like to think that, as much as you wouldn't ever wish for such a thing, that, like you said, certain lessons learned can make us all better. That you can't just have an event like this and not change, frankly.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's about trying to see it around the corner too, and not just fighting the past war. So
Right.
what's next? I mean, it can be overwhelming, but at the same time, I mean, um, we have the best military in the world, bar none, and I think it's well within our capability to sort of see those threats down the road and take care of them before something like another 9/11 happens again,
Yeah.
which could happen, but hopefully it wouldn't.
Well, I
So
don't know, Opus. What do you think of, like, when you think of that day? I mean,
mhm.
it was a victory for the other side. I'll admit, we were against the ropes with a black eye or a fat lip or whatever. But in the grand scheme of things, it changed our society. But I have to think those who don't wish us well are watching this whole COVID thing and thinking, oh, never mind bombs and bullets and airplanes. We just need to go biological. And of course, hopefully nobody's going to get mad at me for suggesting that, because if they haven't thought of that already,
Yeah,
they have. Trust me, folks. I'm not the one giving out the good ideas here, but if you think about it, okay, great. It's going to take us what, a year, 18 months to come up with a vaccine for this and get back to life. But then the next one, is it going to do the same thing? And that's what keeps me up, I'll be honest, because
yeah,
the military can do one thing about certain types of attacks, but this whole COVID stuff has really, I think, been a frankly much bigger impact when you really consider, hey, if I want to attack my enemy, I can do this, and maybe it's superficial. And again, I'm not saying anything about the lives that were lost, but certainly I wonder if those who wish us harm are watching what's going on right now.
yeah. I mean, it's scary stuff. I think the one of the things I took away from 9/11 is the and this goes into what you're saying, is that the support we got in the military, even in the Air National Guard, was completely different on September 11th and on. And so that's great, and it's deserved, I think, for those still serving, for sure, and the sacrifices they're enduring. But it's also important, I think, for us as a country to know that in a time of crisis, hopefully we can pull together. And you can debate whether that's happening now or not. I can tell you that after 9/11, it absolutely did. So what's what's the difference there? I don't have the answer to that, but I know that as Americans, um, that we have to figure that out
Yeah.
because again, September 12th on, you felt all the support you needed. Not that you needed that to do your job, but it helped. I mean, let's
Yeah.
be honest.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Especially in the Air National Guard, we had a lot of citizen soldiers that were they just really stepped it up with the time they were around, and they were working shifts at work and shifts at the Air National Guard. I mean, people don't do that because they're getting rich. They're committed to their mission,
Yeah.
and they're passionate about being American, and that's what it's all about. So, that is another thing that I think really struck me about that day was just the overwhelming community support, and which translated into military support.
Yeah.
Whether it was new equipment we needed. For instance, in the F-15, we only had UHF radios. We couldn't even talk to airliners. Well, that's a big problem if you're intercepting an airliner that may be hijacked. And so, that got taken care of pretty quickly. So,
Good. Hmm.
just things like that.
Opus, let me ask you about November. I don't remember the exact date, but there was another airliner crash on Long Island, and it turned out to be structural / pilot induced. Do you recall that, number one? And
Oh
what
yeah,
if,
in fact,
okay,
believe it or not, Rosie McGrady and I got scrambled on that jet. It obviously had crashed, but because they didn't know what happened at the
right.
time, they scrambled us down just to see. Of course, we only saw wreckage, but yeah, I mean, again, you're like, are you kidding me? This is
Right.
going to
You just
happen
barely
again,
got back. Hmm.
Exactly. So, another unfortunate case, but, it was fortunate that it wasn't another terrorist attack
Yeah.
kind of situation. And I'm sure that the people on the ground, were, not digging that news either.
No, no. I remember
So,
hearing that thinking, oh, nuts, here we go again. And then
yeah,
later when you read the report of the guy using, I think, full rudder, but that was what he was taught.
right.
That was kind of crazy. But yeah, I just wondered again, in the absence of information, people are going to fill in their own narrative. And
Sure.
so you guys, yep, sounds like you blasted off and don't know. And of course,
Right.
did they end up grounding or stopping or anything that day until they figured it out? Do you recall?
They did not. I
Okay.
mean, and I do remember feeling, I wasn't apprehension, but I definitely felt way better prepared, a month later when that incident
Sure.
happened
Yeah.
than on 9/11, just because that was total chaos.
Yeah.
And I think, I've been fortunate again, like I said, to meet some of the people who were on the ground in the World Trade Center area that day. Um, one of a person I met who's become a good friend, Gil Sanborn, was across the street when the attacks happened, and he said that, and this is just kind of inspiring to hear, but he said that they went from total chaos to when they saw the F-15s go over, they just felt a total sense of, okay, well, now we've got this, and so they evacuated out of the city. And I think the only other thing is, it's like I remember that day. I was intercepting. I was up over kind of the George Washington Bridge. They called out a contact that was kind of over by JFK, so kind of southeast, couple miles, and I'm flying over Central Park at a couple hundred feet, and I see a guy jogging, and I just remember thinking to myself, what is this guy doing jogging? When all of this is going on, but he didn't know. He didn't know what was going on. He's out for a morning jog, and I think it's such a good metaphor for that day. It's like people just didn't have a grasp because it wasn't even within
Yeah.
their ability to conceive of something like this happening, even though a few years earlier they had driven a truck underneath the World Trade Center and tried to
That's
bomb
right.
it. So
Yeah. 93, I
uh,
think it was.
yeah,
Yeah.
so
Well, maybe
I
that
just,
was
I
his
don't,
way of processing it. I mean, like I said
right.
earlier, I couldn't just sit and watch the TV. I went to the gym and was lifting
Yeah,
and watching, and I got a good workout. I'll say that,
yeah, yeah,
because there was a lot of angst. But if nothing else, too, it was good to see in the weeks following as people kind of began to return to normal, because that's ultimately what you want,
right.
with
Sure.
all the lessons learned, of course, as we talked about. But well, what did you do after that? Are you still flying? I mean, here we are a long time later, 19 years, but
Yeah, no, retired in 2015, early,
okay.
late 2014, flying for the airlines. And but yeah, what subsequent to 9/11, because our alert mission had increased so much, we actually had to, activate some of our part-time guys. And I
Mm,
was one of those who basically went to full-time Air National Guard duty to cover that alert, and everybody did. It's just we needed a core team that was their only that was their only thing to do.
yeah.
So, but we had airline guys coming in who were part of the unit that would come fly caps and then go back to their airline jobs.
Hmm,
And we had administrative people who left, take a leave of absence from their jobs, and then come in and support the unit, because it wasn't just us that I mean, every piece of that base, the ops tempo increased
yeah.
enormously. So
Yeah.
um, it
Well,
definitely, it was inspiring to see how people responded to a crisis situation
that's
like
right.
that.
And it
Building
usually
down.
brings out the best in people.
Exactly.
So, well, I see an
Yeah.
F-111 on your wall behind you. So what else have you flown?
So I flew F-111s when I first got in the Air Force, and then I went to the F-15 active duty when they parked that jet,
All right.
and then into the Guard. So yeah,
Okay. Well, we've yet to feature the aardvark on the show, so maybe we'll have to bring you on for a proper episode. But
that'd be great.
yeah. All right. Did you end up getting furloughed after 9/11, or were you senior enough?
I did get furloughed, but like I said, I was very fortunate. I'd already been recalled back into the
Okay.
full-time Air National Guard. So
You kept food on the
um,
table.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I thought I was going to get furloughed from this, and I think I ended up missing it by about 2.5 months. They said anyone hired July 17th or after of 2017 is going to get furloughed, and I was hired
Okay,
on May 1st. So looks like I might be okay, but I may have
good,
to. I'm waiting to see the results of a big reshuffle. But I live in San
sure.
Diego, and I'm reading the writing on the wall that I might get displaced out to New York City. So if I'm doing
Okay.
that commute a lot, maybe I'll come say hi.
Yeah, well, I'm in down in San Antonio now,
Oh,
so
okay. I
say
missed
hi
that
on your
part.
way by.
That's right. I'll wave out the
Yeah,
window from the jump seat.
exactly.
Oh man, Opus,
Uh,
you're a national treasure, my friend.
well, I appreciate you doing the podcast. I love it. I'm a big fan. My son, who's in his first week of officer training in the Air Force, called me last night and said, "How'd it go?" And I said, "Well, we're doing it tonight." And he's, because he has no concept of time right now since he's
Yeah,
in training.
yeah,
But I just want to say to all those people who are serving out there, we really appreciate you, and appreciate all the first responders dealing with the COVID
hmm
crisis, all the we back the blue, and just it's a tough time in the country, but we'll just like 9/11, we will come through this a stronger country, and we'll be better on the other side of
I certainly hope so. And
it.
thanks publicly to your son for setting this up. He
Yeah.
wrote the podcast. It's been over a year,
Right.
probably a year and a half ago, saying, "Hey, you got to interview my dad. He was airborne on 9/11 and just hadn't really had a chance to come around to it. So apologies, but
Yeah.
good to see he's following the footsteps, and what's he hoping to fly, or whatever they give him?
Well, he's going out to the 174th at Klamath Falls, Oregon, to fly
Oh,
F-15s
he
like
already
his
knows that.
dad did. I'm sure he's
All
going to do a lot
right.
better than I did, but he's just super pumped to get out there and start his training.
Good for
So
him. Yeah.
yeah,
Good. That's good stuff. Yeah. And I'll publicly apologize to you as well. I had three things on my calendar yesterday. And when the airline called and said, "Hey, we need you to hurry up and go fly," and I had to run off, I called two of them, but not you. So I left you hanging.
that's
Apologies.
okay.
But we made it work today here for my layover
That's
down in
right.
Hawaii. So
And
uh,
flexibility is key to air power,
that's
right?
right. Absolutely. Well, that's what we learned today. So
That's right.
awesome. All right, Opus. Well, thanks a lot.
Yeah, great. And it's good to meet you finally. And let's keep in touch.